Nick Clyde, welcome into the weeds. So good to have you here, mate.
Pleasure to be here, Jeremy.
Mate, Nick, for people playing at home, you are a environmental campaigner par excellence here in Australia. You've been a lifetime environmental activist for Greenpeace.
Yep.
Now you're the New South Wales coordinator for Lock the Gate.
Yep.
And you've been doing a lot of work from the front lines, from the paddock, all the way through to policy and the halls of parliament now. But, mate, what set you out on this course? Why did you decide, or did you stumble into it? Did you not decide? Why did you decide to become an environmental activist and warrior?
Yeah, looks a good question. I guess I would blame my parents. I grew up in Canberra. My old man, massive kind of bird watcher, ecologist. He was a doctor, but he had a huge passion for the natural environment. And I remember as a kid, I think maybe we got door knocked by Greenpeace or something, and they used to produce a little magazine that they'd send out around Australia. So we subscribed to that, and I started to get the magazine and, those photos of ship actions all around the world and all that kind of stuff. Can't remember how old I was, maybe 10 or 11 or something. And then I remember an International Whaling Commission meeting in Canberra at the Lakeside Hotel. And my oldies took me along to that. That was probably the first protest I went to. And Greenpeace had inflated a whale outside the hotel. But then later on, they'd smuggled it inside the hotel and inflated it in the corridor between the Japanese delegation's hotel room and the conference room where the thing was happening. And the staff or cops or whoever had to stab the whale, to get him into the meeting. It was all in the media. And probably from that moment, something was kind of like, oh, this is interesting. And then
so you were attracted to the dynamics of it, the theatre of it,
yeah,
the realness of it.
That's right. And always, and I guess just growing up in the family that I grew up in, I was maybe unbeknownst to me, I'd kind of started to develop concerns about the natural world. And then I moved to Sydney after I'd done uni in Canberra.
What did you study?
I studied politics, Asian studies, and anthropology.
Wow.
Yeah. Graduated, moved to Sydney, and then I was just kicking around in Sydney with my brother. We were working for an event lighting company, and then I noticed a little ad in the paper for Greenpeace. It was for one of the worst jobs the organisation had, the door-knocking fundraising thing. But immediately volunteered for the direct action team. And shortly thereafter began my life of crime in the environment movement. I remember the first direct action, Bob Carr was opposition leader. At the time, they wanted to build a municipal waste incinerator just down the road here in southern Sydney. And the locals were up in arms against it because of all the toxic, air pollution from the waste incinerator. So we did a direct action where we drove into the incinerator. We had Darren Hinch, remember him?
Of course.
We had a minivan, a Darren Hinch cameraman in the van with us. We kind of drove through the front gate, ran up the smokestack, and we had a banner that unfurled that said, incineration meet your Waterloo, because it was the Waterloo incinerator.
Nice.
Yes, very tidy banner. And it was great. We shut down the incinerator overnight. The locals came along.
Did you get arrested?
Brought thermoses of tea and Christmas cake. I remember that.
Nice.
Did we get arrested? I don't think we did in the end. Yeah, I think.
But those sort of direct actions, like they attract a lot of attention, and it'll be 10 or 15 seconds in a news item. But there's a lot of logistics, isn't there? A lot of planning, a lot of coordination, a lot of cunning that goes into it, a lot of safety issues too, isn't there? There's a lot
100%.
A lot of moving parts, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. So you got to get all that right, but also you got to get the science right, the politics right. From memory, I think
timing, of course.
The timing, yeah. I think Bob Carr wound up opposing that incinerator as leader of the opposition, and the thing never went ahead. And now Clover Moore's built a bunch of apartments there. So there is no incineration in Waterloo.
Yeah, I fought an incinerator out in Eastern Creek. Now there's one, I think, proposed for Park. So everything old is new again. They keep coming back up, those incinerators. So, campaigning against a toxic waste incinerator in a suburban environment is probably an easier campaign. You've moved on from Greenpeace
Yep,
to Lock the Gate. Tell
that's
us
right.
about Lock the Gate, because it's probably well known in Australia, but it's a relatively new. I suppose it's been around for a decade or more, but environmental uh, NGO. Tell us about Lock the Gate and how you got involved with them.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeremy. So we've got a volunteer at the moment, one of our amazing volleys, who's doing a research project, a kind of history project of Lock the Gate. So actually sent me a text last week and said he'd found the first press release that my name was on exactly 10 years ago, October 2015. So I've been around for a decade now. The organization, yeah, it's kind of like a lean startup, or it was 12, 13 years ago. Formed in Australia, really working with the farming community in Queensland and New South Wales in particular, at the time where the kind of coal mine boom was just kicking off and coal seam gas was becoming a thing. And the farming community were kind of pissed off that a gas company could come along and tell them that they were going to be drilling for gas underneath their property and that there wasn't much they could do about it. So they decided to form an organisation to lock their gates to the coal seam gas companies. And very quickly that sprouted up in Queensland and in New South Wales and the Hunter Valley. You might have even been in the mix yourself there, Jeremy, in the early days.
Early on, yeah, I watched it sort of form. I was a politician, so I suppose there was a sort of arm length thing. We're operating, together in parallel, but sort of in silos there. But it goes to my point of there's some easy environmental campaigns telling people not to slaughter whales, burn rubbish in people's backyards.
Yeah.
Probably easier to get over the line, but Lock the Gate emerged when we were in the middle of a gigantic coal boom. It was exporting vast amounts of coal to the world, opening up new coal mines, greenfield coal mines, expanding existing coal fields, and a new fossil fuel development, which was fracking and coal seam gas. So really, it was a bit of a David and Goliath battle, wasn't it, to get on the stage and to even be heard in that context of the vast amounts of impetus and backing that these huge industries, global multinational companies and politicians all backing them that they had.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, it still is a bit of a David and Goliath struggle. Coal seam gas is obviously a newer industry, but mining coal, goes right back to the early days of the colony. Hey, I mean, I think it was 1798 or something like that the first shipment of coal left New South Wales for India. So, I mean, that's how long the industry's been going here.
There's a reason they called it Newcastle, because there was all that coal.
Exactly. Yeah, all the way down the beach. You can still see it. If you go up there and you walk along the beach just south of the harbour,
you can see the coal seams.
Yeah,
so they knew.
That's right.
So it had a lot of buy-in, it had a lot of backing, a lot of history, and was exploding in the scale and expanding its footprint. And so there was a lot of concern.
That's right.
There. How did you gather yourself, and how did you decide to best tackle those industries?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I suppose the thing that comes to mind actually were two things. One, I guess what I've learned at Lock the Gate is the kind of modus operandi of the organisation is to try and find those things that unite us, unite disparate parties, bring unusual allies together. So, what are those things? Fresh water, drinking water. We all love our water. We all need water. Farmland to grow our food and crops. We all want to do the right thing by our kids. We want to protect nature, well, hopefully, most people do. So how do we kind of form alliances with people that are interested in those things? And also love of place. They don't want their home to be trashed by a massive coal or gas development. So But one of my first memories with Lock the Gate, I think it was only been in the job for a week or two, was when the Southern Highlands community, you'd remember this campaign, POSCO, South Korean company, was wanting to build a coal mine in the Southern Highlands called the Hume Coal Project. The local community arced up about it, local landholders, local farmers, really worried about the groundwater. And it turned out that Jimmy Barnes has a place in the Southern Highlands, and he'd started showing up at some meetings down there and made it known that he wasn't a big fan of this coal mine near Berrima. And so the first protest that I ever went to with Lock the Gate, I think it was week 2, was Barnesy down the road here at Circular Quay outside a hotel, commenting to the media that, it was crazy to approve this coal mine, that it would threaten the drinking water and groundwater of the Southern Highlands. I think he said something like, building this coal mine, it would be criminal on the news. And a week later, Mike Baird was Premier at the time. It's like, well, Barnesy's arced up about a coal mine expansion in the Southern Highlands. Better see what this is about. So he wound up meeting the Premier of the time and saying his piece with some local members of the community about that project. Now, that took a long time, that campaign, as you would recall. I think it was 11 years from when the first mining exploration activities started to happen and to the eventual abandonment of that project. But the local community won. Took 11 years, but they beat that mine. There is no Hume Coal project in the Southern Highlands. POSCO sold all of their land and moved on and gave up. So massive community victory on behalf of local people.
It's really interesting because there's a lot of people who would be surprised to know that not that long ago, it was hard to find people who were even fighting coal mines who were that concerned about climate impacts, the fossil fuel impacts. Yeah. So they were they understood the economic benefit of coal. There was this argument about keeping the lights on and our own domestic demand, and this argument that if we don't sell the coal, ours is the good coal, someone else will sell the bad coal, and we've got the best coal. So you had to find other areas to work on, water, or the things you've listed. But that's changed over time, hasn't it? Those people that were maybe less forthcoming or more sceptical in their consideration of climate impacts, that there's been a real change in a lot of those attitudes. We've seen a lot of farming communities now who are very active in the climate space as they see the impacts locally and understand the science.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. And it's a good point that you make, because in the early days of my time at Lock the Gate, the climate issue could be divisive in communities. And quite often, particularly in the earlier days, you would find people passionately opposed to a gas project or a coal project, as you say, who actually had no time for the climate issue, weren't worried about it, or, actively thought it's not a problem that we need to worry about, but were concerned about other issues, be it drinking water, be it its impact on farmland. It might have even been Aboriginal cultural heritage, a whole range of issues, but not climate.
The social impact of having a gigantic mine down the road, the FIFO workers.
The dust, the noise, the air pollution, exactly. So, and that's why we were kind of just trying to find out where was the common ground? What do we have in common to work together to stop these projects? But yes, I think you're quite right. I think broadly speaking now the politics feels like it's changed. The mood in the community feels like it's changed. And it feels like most people have a concern about where Australia's headed, the floods, the droughts, the hot weather, increasing hot weather, the bushfire, the, insurance problems and, insurance premiums going up or homes becoming uninsurable. I think more of us are having a direct experience of that, or we know people who've been impacted. And I think gradually more and more people have come into the tent and think, yeah, this is a real problem. We've got to do something about it. Even at my home, I live in the inner west in Sydney. I was surprised a couple of months ago when my landlord lives next door. We're good mates. I got a phone call saying, "Oh, Nick, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to put your rent up $50 a week in a cost of living crisis on a grassroots NGO wage. I got 3 kids. $50 a week is a bit of a hit for me." The reason she gave was because the landlord reinsurance costs have gone up, and she needs to pass that cost on to me, the tenant. And that we know from the insurance industry that is a direct result of the global cost of insurance increasing, and that impacts people living, in a place where I wouldn't have thought there's much of a bushfire risk to my house in the middle of suburbia, but my insurance premiums have gone up all the same.
It's like a lot of impacts coming. We'll get to that. In those campaigns against new like greenfield coal mines, there were some wins like Hume Coal, but there were also some pretty big losses. A
Yeah,
lot of hard fought losses. Maules Creek was one.
yeah,
That was a really pivotal moment, wasn't it? Because that was a new, like a massive new coal mine, a massive expansion. I mean, there was some coal up there, but the scale was gigantic. Massive open cut,
yeah.
fiercely fought by the community. We saw people like David Pocock, so many people come
Yeah.
out. But how does an organisation like yours and the community deal with a hard fought campaign like that, and then see it get approved and grow into this great big hole in the ground?
Yeah, look, and Maules Creek is one of the mines that's applying for a mega expansion of their mine right now. I mean, can you believe it? At the tail end of 2025, in a climate crisis with all of these impacts that we've just been talking about getting worse. So they're one of the projects that are applying. But yeah, it was pretty heartbreaking. I was pretty heavily involved in that campaign. I spent
There
time
was a
up
lot
there.
of direct action up there, wasn't
There was
there?
a ton of direct action. I was arrested in the forest up there in a tree set, trying to stop that incredible lead forest from getting logged. But that one feels a bit personal to me because I've spent so much time in that forest. I go to the Whitehaven AGMs. I've got a friend who also works for Lock the Gate, a good friend. I'm good friends of her family. They live at Maules Creek. They've seen their community obliterated by that mine. The mining company, Whitehaven, has bought out family farms. Things that they promised when they were getting that mine through and the government approved it haven't materialised. Like the school hasn't been flooded with new kids. It's quite the opposite problem. Because the mining companies bought up all of these farms, you've seen a depopulation of the local area. So the social fabric of Maules Creek has decayed. There's just fewer people to contribute to community life around there. You've seen the forest degraded and logged.
Massive impact on groundwater, which they said could
Massive.
be huge drawdowns in critically important groundwater up there.
Massive water problem.
Pollution.
I know people at Maules Creek who, in that mega drought that we had, ran out of water, had to destock their farms. One family moved to Queensland because it wasn't viable for them to stay on their farm. It was that dry. In the meantime, Whitehaven was caught stealing 1 billion litres of water, which they later were found guilty of in court. So that's the kind of thing that's going on. It's kind of total disregard for communities, for the natural environment, for basic rules about sharing water with local people and farming enterprises. And it goes on and on. And, every time, Whitehaven Coal is a rap sheet as long as your arm. It's actually on Lock the Gate's webpage if anyone's interested in having a look.
No, go and have a look. We'll put the link up. Yeah.
Yeah. But, basically the company's making that much money out of the coal industry that every time they get convicted or fined, it's just it's kind of like a parking fine for a wealthy person.
The cost of doing business.
Cost of doing business, slap on the wrists.
And again, like I remember going out to Maules Creek and visiting the Laird family out there for the very first time, and they were dealing. I don't actually think it was Maules Creek. I think it was an expansion of another mine, but they had the EIS, the environmental impact statement, and they were literally as a family going through thousands of pages of technical, legal, scientific, economic data, and having to respond to this coal complex that was going to destroy their forest, destroy their farmland. And I felt it was incredibly brave of them, but also I was concerned. I was like, how can you possibly go up against this? And what we saw again and again and again was all the concerns were dealt with, in sort of modifications and
Yeah.
conditions of consent. And, oh, look, we'll deal with this down the track. There'll
Yeah.
be a plan for this later, but none of that eventuates.
No, that's right.
People will have to. So there's two parts to that question. Is it really fair that the community has to spend so much time fighting these coal mines? And are the conditions, the planning laws, the modifications that get made really worth anything at all?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and I'm going to take the first one first. Communities up against coal companies, as you say, you've got, farming family around a kitchen table. They're already running their business. They're already coping with a whole bunch of, kids in school, working outside during the day. They've got very limited time. They're trying to wade through, as you say, yes, it literally, when they used to print them, those EISs would be massive, thousands of pages. And they're up against coal companies with deep pockets who pay professional consultants to generate dedicated reports on every single element of their project. And he who pays the piper calls the tune, right? So you pay an environmental consultant to do that work. It's like feeding the ball in the rugby scrum. You know the outcome that you want, and you hire people who will deliver those outcomes for you. So it is kind of asymmetrical in that sense. And often, we got one community out at the moment around Mudgee Way. They've got multiple coal mine expansions coming through back to back. The community's a bit exhausted from the engagement and having to wade through mountains of documents, and it never ends. So that's a massive problem. In terms of the second part of your question around, is it possible to, they call it conditioning, is it possible for the government to set so-called strict conditions, you often hear that term in the media, such that the impacts of these mining projects can be mitigated? Too often the answer is no. The most obvious example in my mind is with greenhouse gases. We here in New South Wales, our Net Zero Commission, the New South Wales Productivity Commission, anyone who's paying attention, Minister Sharp herself, our Minister for Climate Change, they're on they are on a unity ticket saying we are not on track to meet any of the targets that the Parliament over there legislated at the end of 2023. And coal mining is part of the problem because it generates so much methane, burns so much diesel fuel to mine that coal, that before you burn a single ton of it, it's a massive greenhouse problem already. Now, what happens is that the government sets conditions. Oh, well, you've got to develop a greenhouse gas management plan, and that will mitigate those methane and diesel pollution problems. We've got one of the biggest mines in the state, Hunter Valley Operations, applying for the biggest expansion ever in New South Wales right now. Would you believe that they developed a greenhouse gas management plan with precisely zero greenhouse gas abatement measures in it? Like literally zero, literally nothing. And that was approved by the New South Wales Department of Planning as a greenhouse gas mitigation plan. It seems kind of bizarre to even say it out loud. We got a story up in the Newcastle Herald about it. It's a bit of a please explain story. As far as I know, that plan still has not been updated 2 years later. So when we hear about strict conditions, that's an extreme example, but that's an example of how strict these conditions can be. Create a plan to lower your direct greenhouse gas emissions. Come forward with a plan with zero measures in it. Great, that's good enough for us. Tick, go away and pollute. It's completely ridiculous. The government still hasn't overhauled that system. We're still not on track to meet any of our targets. And the government itself says it's essential that we meet those targets. And they're right about that.
Well, we've legislated. It's a statutory requirement that we meet them now. The community has demanded action. They want us to be at net zero by at least 2050. So give us a bit of a state of the world address of where we're up to in New South Wales. Because when I came into Parliament, we had energy ministers who would stand up and say, New South Wales is a coal state.
Mm.
looking at the history of coal mining in this state, and always will be. We'll be selling coal for hundreds of years. We're not in that position at the moment, but and we're re-engineering our our energy systems as our coal-fired power stations go offline. We're burning less and less coal domestically as
Mm.
we build the renewable energy zones and people put solar on and we electrify our manufacturing and the rest. But there's still a lot of coal mining going on, and as you say, there's this tranche of modifications and expansions
Mm.
that are absolutely enormous. Tell us about what's happening in the coalfields of New South Wales. How big are the expansions, and what implications do they have for meeting our greenhouse gas targets?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question, and thank you, Jeremy, and your colleagues for voting for that legislation in the Parliament. But full bipartisan support. So that's crucial that the MPs in the New South Wales Parliament are speaking up about this and making sure that that law is enforced. Not just the the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law, to keep warming to safe levels. Yeah, in terms of coal, it kind of blows my mind where the industry is up to actually. As you say, in New South Wales, we're using less and less coal per annum, and we've got an official objective to not use any at all as soon as we can. So I think what's that, maybe mid-2030s roughly, is when New South Wales will completely stop burning coal. Some people think, oh, don't we have to keep expanding the mines? Don't we need coal for our own power stations? It's only about 13% of the coal that's mined in the state. So a small fraction that's burnt in our power stations here. Most of it is exported.
And most of it's still exported to Japan, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
Japan,
Taiwan,
Korea.
a growing chunk a chunk that was growing to China. Now there's a strange thing going on at the moment where you've got there's 19 coal mine expansion projects in the planning system right now, including, as I mentioned, Hunter Valley operations. So the single, if that's approved, and it's got a ways to go yet, but if the government decides they're going to approve that, that would be the single largest project ever approved in New South Wales at a time when it's so clear that we can't be approving any projects and we need to be moving away from coal as a global community, as an Australian community, as people in New South Wales.
And that puts coal mining happening in the Hunter Valley into like many, many decades, doesn't
2045.
2045.
They are applying to mine till 2045. So we've got this tsunami of expansion proposals. We've got, since Labor came to office, they've assessed 7 expansions. They've approved every single one. Labor came to office promising, and they've repeated this pledge since being in government, that new coal expansions and extensions would be assessed independently. So far, as I said, they've determined 7 expansions. None of them have gone to the Independent Planning Commission, and the bulk of the 19 will not. Some will, but most will not. So there's a massive problem right there.
Why do you think it has to go to the IPC, the Independent Planning Commission? Is that how you're going to you more thoroughly interrogate the proposal, give the community their opportunity to have their say?
Yeah, look, the ICAC has apparently raised issues about the separation between assessment and decision making. At the moment, what happens is the Department of Planning, which works for the Minister of the Day, right? The government promised to review their coal policy. They haven't done it. They're still operating under John Barilaro's coal policy 2.5 years after taking government.
He's the former national deputy premier and got in a bit of trouble and wrote a very pro-coal. And the policy, some people might think, is a thick tome. It's like isn't it like a 4-pager?
It's kind of like a booklet.
It's like a booklet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a year 8,
Yes.
a year 8 geography assessment, and this is
with a bit of graphic design.
With a bit of graphic design, some nice pictures and the rest.
Yeah.
This is the sort of policy document that's guiding our biggest industry.
Right, exactly. So we've got a massive number of expansions going, that are trying to get approval. Some of these mines are kind of recognizing that in future it's going to be hard to get these kinds of projects through. So they're applying now
They're in a rush
for
to get it.
expansions that they don't even intend to start for another decade.
Yeah.
So they're basically trying to game the weak regulatory system that we have at the moment. So that's one problem. In terms of the broader kind of politics, as you know, I think, Jeremy, from your questions in budget estimates, the Premier is on the record now as saying that there's been conversations between the New South Wales government and every country that buys coal from New South Wales, and that they have, in the words of the Premier, all indicated in some way, shape or another that eventually, that they're going to start buying less of our coal, and that eventually, sooner or later, it's going to go to zero.
Mm.
So the trajectory of the industry is really clear, but the political power of that industry remains very strong. And there's this we can't even get to this is why I'm kind of campaigning for the government just to implement their own promise about independent assessment and determination, because at least in that scenario, you've got someone who's a bit arm's length from the process, an independent commission saying, well, okay, what do they want to do? Wow, what does the climate law says? What's the impact on the community is going to be? And they make the decision. Instead of that, you've got the Department of Planning writing an assessment report and then advising itself what decision to make. Surprise, surprise, assessment report says approve. The boss of that section goes, oh, great, I'm going to approve it. The minute the community finds out about that and finds out what the government's assessment is the day that it's too late. When the decision's already made, it's done and dusted. There is no opportunity to argue the toss on merits in the Land and Environment Court, and they move on to the next.
And that was the power that was the thing that was stripped out of.
That's right.
In the previous coalition government, merits appeals.
That's right.
Out. So it's purely on the process of the assessment now, isn't it?
Yeah.
There has to be some flaw in the assessment rather than, is this a good idea to be overturning a community, overturning upending. I sort of misspoke there, but creating a new coal mine in an age of climate change.
Exactly. So
and to your point about just like blindly continuing to approve these coal mines, there's that maxim, change comes very slowly and then in a hurry.
Yeah.
That's we're getting very close to that hurry bit as the rest of the world is enacting, bringing in more renewable energy, finding other markets. We're a long way away from a lot of other markets. People are relying on their own domestic demand. That's going to be more of it. And so these places, especially in Asia, are going to be either turning off their purchasing or looking to alternatives like gas or renewables, aren't they?
Well, that's right. And even some of the countries that we're selling coal to at the moment have their own very large coal mining industries. So, for example, Tim Buckley, who you would know from Climate Energy Finance, he reckons that it's entirely likely that China, because they're building renewables so quickly and mining a lot of coal, he reckons it makes total sense for them as their renewables start increasing even more than they are now, that a portion of electricity generation that they need Australian coal for at the moment will be overcome by their renewable energy generation and their own coal mining. And if they're going to ditch the coal that you're paying top dollar for from a different country, support your own industry. So it's very likely, in his view, that will disappear much sooner than people think. And that's like 40 or 50 million tonnes per annum at the moment. It's almost a third of all of our exports. So, yeah, it's a real risk. And we're kind of worried that the government's kind of like just in the thrall of industry, just wants to keep pretending that there's no problem to be solved here. There is no issue. We'll just keep approving all of these projects. We won't worry too much about the impacts on mining communities. And when change comes, as you say, it's likely to come more quickly and be way more disruptive and ruin the lives of mining communities.
And this is the argument you're making, Lock the Gate's making with a lot of other groups in the Hunter Valley, saying
Absolutely.
You need to be paying attention to this, because if it collapses, we need to have an alternative like now in place.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, I'm a member of the union movement, member of the Australian Services Union. We're working with the union movement in the Hunter. keen to see like a lot more activity from government and to support, the community initiatives there to do everything they can to prepare for this change that's coming much sooner than people realise for sure. So at the moment, it's been pretty frustrating. There's lots of talk about bureaucratic and structural kind of, departmental changes, but so far, no money spent on the ground from a pool of cash that the government already has, more than $100 million. But none of that so far has been spent in
their jobs and
communities.
future investment authorities that we haven't seen anything there.
Exactly.
It just seems to be soft pedaling on these things while these mega coal mines are in their own right. They're called modifications, but in their own right, they're absolutely vast. Are moving through the planning system. One of the things becoming we're becoming more aware of is the emissions from these coal mines, the actual scope 1 emissions from these coal mines, the fugitive emissions from these coal mines, the diesel that's burnt. And
Yeah.
a lot of people, I don't think, would understand that it's the mining process releases a lot of methane and greenhouse gases. Can you talk about that and the fact that we may not be monitoring it and measuring it, which we're now required to do, or the miners
Yeah.
are now required to do. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, look, I can't. Unfortunately, I might be able to talk too much about that, Jeremy. I hope I don't nerd out too much for your
Nerd
listeners.
away, mate. This is good.
But yeah, look, it's one of my passions actually in my job at the moment. I'm on an EPA advisory group. I've looked really closely at this issue for a long time. And partly it's calling bullshit on the industry claims that they're serious about their emissions. We know that no one's doing anything about the emissions from the coal when it's burnt, which is the majority of emissions, mostly happening overseas with our coal because it's burnt overseas. But they used to pretend that they were doing a lot to mitigate the methane and diesel pollution, but they're not. And those emissions are forecast to increase, not decrease in New South Wales this decade, diesel and methane. And
methane's a really, really powerful greenhouse gas. It's in coal, and as you open up the coal, it's released to the atmosphere.
Exactly.
It's a fugitive gas.
Yeah, you cannot. I mean, all coal has methane, in it? That's exactly right. And the minute you do anything to disturb that coal seam, you will immediately start releasing methane. Sometimes like mind-boggling quantities of methane. And as you said, it's a big problem from a climate perspective. In fact, there's a fellow who runs an organisation called the Global Methane Hub. He's the former Environment Minister of Chile. He was in Australia recently. And he had, when you're on a bus or a train, or bus rather, and there's like a red emergency handle, in the case of accident, pull the handle and pop the window out and get out of the bus or whatever. The emergency brake, perhaps on a train. He was traveling around with a prop that said, we need to pull the emergency brake on methane because it has a really potent impact over 10, 15 years on the climate, a really powerful global warming gas. And if you can reduce your levels of methane, the scientists are saying that could buy time to get your carbon dioxide levels down and try and avert some of the nastier impacts and more extreme impacts of climate change. So instead of pulling the emergency brake in New South Wales, government keeps giving the green light to industry to increase their pollution. And, we kind of engage in pretty much all of these expansions. And I can tell you that there's they're just not regulating. They're approving projects that say to the government, yeah, if you approve this, we kind of figure there's not a whole lot we can do with these methane pollution. It's going to increase. Maybe we'll look at expensive technology that we don't really want to implement, don't think is technically viable, but, we don't really think it's going to happen. The government is saying, oh, well, let's approve your project anyway, but we'll require you to study the problem in 2 years' time and come back to us and tell us how you're going. And that kind of thing just keeps happening. At the moment in the Illawarra, they're building a methane abatement project at one of the worst emitting underground mines in the highest emitter in New South Wales, the Appin coal mine. When they complete that project, it will have been funded 3/4 by the New South Wales government, not the coal company. And it will have taken them 5 years to build one pilot plant that, if it works, will deal with 2% of their methane emissions. And they're a massive emitter. No plan to scale that up. No plan going forward about who's going to pay for it to be scaled up. What about the other 98%, you might ask? No one seems to be asking that question. Everyone's on a go slow, a bit of a don't worry about it. Let the coal industry have their way. And if people in the community are suffering and our children collectively are going to suffer more in future, oh, well, that's the cost of doing business.
We've had the federal government bring in their safeguard mechanism, which should, a lot of people would think, would capture a lot of this, and that these big polluters would be properly measuring, monitoring, and reporting their fugitive emissions. But of course, they've got an incentive not to do so, because then they're going to have to pay for it, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. And fantastic. We are definitely getting into the weeds with the safeguard mechanism, Jeremy, but I love that question. And you're right. One of the problems at the moment, there's most of the scientific community who look at the methane problem are reporting that the levels of methane coming out of our open cut mines in particular are massively underreported to the federal government. Lots of scientists believe that the levels could be roughly double what's being reported to the government. So already, with the level of reporting that we've got, we're not on track to meet our targets. Methane pollution is increasing, and that doesn't even account for this level of underreport. So there's a lot
which could completely blow our capacity to reach our net zero targets out of the water.
100%.
Which is a legal requirement for the government to do.
Yeah, 100%. And look, there's some really perverse things happening under the safeguard mechanism, the federal government's plan. Have been looking at the Appin mine recently. So as I mentioned earlier, that's the highest emitting coal mine in New South Wales for methane. Under the safeguard mechanism, their baseline was set about 300,000 tonnes above the current level of pollution. Bear in mind, the current level of pollution already makes them the highest emitter in the state. Their baseline, they were given like another 300,000 tonnes on top of that. So they were basically rewarded as a high emitter and able to sell 300,000 odd tonnes of carbon credits, effectively, safeguard mechanism credits, to another company for, I think it's somewhere around $10 million is the value of those credits. So how is that an incentive for that mine to reduce their emissions of methane right now that we urgently need to do?
Well, I'd say it's not. And I'd say it's just some clever accounting, which in the net result is a cooked planet. But people are fighting back again and again. It's community groups who are fighting back. There was a decision that's called the Denman case.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that, because that's a community group, isn't it, up there? Denman.
It is.
The name, it's a big, long name.
Yeah.
The Denman group, who took on the Mount Pleasant coal mine, the expansion there. Tell us about it, and how did they win, and why is that so important?
Yeah, it's a great question, and they're an amazing community. Small community environment group in the Hunter Valley, based in and around Muswellbrook and Denman and Aberdeen.
And that area is just coal central. It's a gigantic, like, people think about a coal mine in that area.
Yeah.
You get on Google Maps and have a look. It's a coal complex.
100%.
It is just one gigantic coal complex, a coal mine.
And they live daily with the noise, with the dust, all of the impacts of that mine. So there's a farming...
And they've had enough, and they've just said...
100%.
Thanks enough. A lot, we've had enough.
There's a farming family there that's been in that community for decades. So they worked with environmental lawyers to challenge Mount Pleasant, which is owned by a mob called Mac Energy, which is owned by a billionaire Indonesian family. They got approval from the state government to double the size of their coal mine. Again, kind of mind-boggling, and mine all the way until 2048. The Denman mob came along with some environmental lawyers called Johnson Legal, and they argued that...
Shout out to Elaine Johnson, isn't it?
Shout out to Elaine Johnson. I mean, the local group, incredible people, Elaine Johnson and her firm, amazing lawyers. And they succeeded in court in arguing that actually under New South Wales planning law, the law's always required that there be a consideration of the impacts of climate on local communities from the project, including the scope 3 emissions, like from all of the coal that's burnt. So
overseas. So even if the coal, if 100% of the coal is burnt in Taiwan and China and Vietnam, wherever, they still have to consider the impact of burning that coal on the climate and on these communities.
Exactly.
Who are, especially in the Hunter Valley, the mid-north coast, are being smashed by, droughts and then floods that are increasing in their severity, impact, cost, and becoming increasingly dangerous.
Yeah, so no, that's exactly right. So it's a very, very important decision because actually it illustrated that the government itself and the Department of Planning and the people that were making the decisions didn't actually completely understand what the law required. So this wasn't a new piece of law, that no one changed the law. It was just the Supreme Court, the highest court in New South Wales, saying, actually, this is what the law's always said. It's just that no one understood and has been applying it correctly. And what it means in a nutshell is that now what the law, unless the government changes it, and we are a bit worried about that, their moves afoot right now, but the law of the land today says that if you want to approve a massive new coal project, you have to consider local communities, local people living in the vicinity of those projects and the global impact and the local impact of the climate change on those communities. And that hadn't been properly happening. So
you think it's just a rational, reasonable thing to do? Like because the coal gets on the boat at Newcastle and sails out, like it's still being burnt in a finite biosphere that's going to impact us at all. Just because we wave goodbye to that coal doesn't mean it's not going to have an impact. The burning of it is not going to have an impact on our climate. It seems like a pretty simple concept, but remarkable that it took this case to really enshrine it in some new law.
Yeah, it's 100%. So now that there's a real question mark about this massive Mount Pleasant project, the company's applying to the High Court of Australia because they want to try and overturn the decision. I think we find out, or the locals find out next month, if the High Court accepts the case or not. If they say, no, we don't think there's any new law to be resolved here, then it'll go back to the Land and Environment Court. But New South Wales being New South Wales, what's going to happen, and I think this is already starting to occur, is that the company will put forward a modification application, and not to get too boffiny on you, but that basically means that that's some insurance for them. If they submit a smaller project, maybe a 5, 6, 7 year extension, they can do that as a mod. They know that modification won't go to the Independent Planning Commission. So if the government wants to approve it, they can assess the thing in-house, stamp it as approved and get on with it.
So just like just a much smaller chunk of a bigger project, and then probably come back later on and modify
with another mod.
Another mod, rather than go for the big project, they just do it in little bite-sized chunks.
Exactly.
To avoid the IPC and this precedent's been set by the Supreme Court. And it's also like being appealed to the High Court. Like you've got a tiny little environment group.
Yeah.
That's probably, I don't know what their arrangement with.
Tiny grassroots group.
They've got to fight
smell of an oily rag.
They've got a community effort to fight an incredibly expensive, long-running legal case through multiple courts, all the way to the High Court of Australia.
Yeah,
it's not a very fair system.
And imagine a coal company going all the way to the High Court of Australia to say, no, we don't think that anyone should be looking at the impact of our project on local people and the climate that they live in and the climate their kids will inherit and the land and the, uninsurable homes as a result of fire and drought, biodiversity going extinct, the heat. They're predicting 50-degree days in Sydney in future. That's what the federal government's climate assessment said, according to the pathway we're on at the moment. You can't even work outside if you're a farmer tilling a field, looking after cattle or whatever, if you're working for local government, if you're trying to fix up the local footy field or whatever, the impacts are vast. And imagine the coal company going all the way to the High Court to say, actually, we don't want you considering any of that.
Don't even think about it.
Yeah.
It's like, don't even properly assess it and wait up. Just, we're not even going to think about it.
Yeah, because we reckon there's a bit more money to be made in the Hunter Valley, and we'd rather you just got out of the way and let us do it. Thanks very much.
And we now know that, heat waves are killing more people than just about anything around the world, and we've got biospheres collapsing. So, let's not think about that. So that was a great decision. It's being contested. But right now in New South Wales, it's the sort of middle of October 2025. There's a new tranche of planning laws. The Environmental Planning and Assessment Act is a 50-year-old act. It was brought in by the Rann government, the New South Wales Labor government in the 1970s.
Yeah.
At its time, it was a sort of revolutionary new way to do planning, to consider the environment, to properly assess these things. There was a lot of issues with sort of cronyism and corruption and making sure there was more transparency. But it's an old act. It needs revision. The government is bringing in a rewrite of the act, some major amendments to the act, and they're doing so saying that we need to cut red tape, we need to centralise decision-making, streamline decision-making, have more compliant development, these types of things to facilitate housing. There's a lot of public concern about the housing crisis, undersupply, the cost of getting approvals, the time it takes to get housing onto the market. But it's a bit of a Trojan horse, is it not, for other projects? There's some concern in the community that it may actually disempower people concerned about major resource projects, reduce scrutiny, create more of a black box, more of a corruption risk. And it's being rushed through pretty quickly. Like it may be the law of the land next Thursday, as early as next Thursday or the week after. Tell us what your concerns are, the lock the gates and other concerns are about the planning laws. What are they and what are your concerns?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. We really worried about this. We've just been chatting about this Denman, Mount Pleasant coal case and the spotlight that put on looking after our own communities. We've kind of worried that this heads in the opposite direction. Like you say, Jeremy, you're a member of parliament. I know you've got a young family. I've got kids as well. The government brought this in just before school holidays. There's been no consultation at all with anyone outside of government other than the Liberal Party, I understand. And in the lead up to this bill being released, the draft, and they want to put it through without sending the bill to committee. I know that there's the Environmental Defender's Office, Johnson Legal, who won the Mount Pleasant case. People who are like, Elaine Johnson literally writes textbook chapters on environmental law, literally writing the book, if you like. She has produced a legal opinion with a list of concerns as long as your arm about this bill that would fundamentally change some really important things in the Planning Act. And there's very little time, almost no time for scrutiny of these issues. And at the moment, the government's saying they're not going to send it to committee. They just want to smash it through the parliament. There are corruption concerns.
All of a sudden, a lot of the decision-making is going to be in the hands of the minister or I think the Secretary of Planning.
Yeah, that's right.
It's going to go there. A lot of the detail of the planning laws is going to be in environmental planning instruments, which are just regulations where it's not really written. It's not written into the act.
It doesn't exist yet.
It doesn't exist. It's just a kiss and a promise from the planning minister that we'll do this later on, and then it's up to people to to fight all of these different changes potentially through disallowances in the parliament, but not in a sort of a global appraisal of why they're doing it in this way now at this time. And so it makes it much more difficult to raise community concern and the rest about what they're doing and why.
Yeah, that's right. And look, there could be some very, very radical things that happen if this goes through as is. One of them is that there's this provision in the bill where the minister of the day could declare coal mining as this thing called targeted assessed development, which would actually, if that were to happen, it would make it actually illegal for a decision maker to consider, is this site suitable for this development? Is it in the public interest? Certain environmental impacts, those things would be unlawful for a decision maker to consider. Like, absolutely insane. Now, Minister Scully asserts that he has no interest in using that provision for coal. But when we had a conversation with the minister about that, we said, well, great, we absolutely don't think you should either, or any future minister. So will you rule that out in an amendment to the legislation that's currently before the parliament? And the answer was no, I won't. So if the minister won't rule out doing something he says he doesn't want to do, one of the problems that we have is, we started this interview when I was talking about this promise that the government did make. Well, we think it's important that coal mine expansions, because they're controversial, that they should be assessed independently. That was something the government says it wants to do. Now, they haven't done it. 7 projects assessed and approved. None of them went to independent assessment by the IPC. So if the government isn't doing right now something it said it would do, and it was its own policy, it kind of makes me, and I think many people in the community, nervous that they won't do something they say they're not interested in doing with, more special treatment for coal.
In the future, they may just say, that was then, this is now.
Right.
Like there's some imperative to do this.
Yeah, or there's a new person there's a reshuffle, there's a change of government, whatever.
That wasn't me. I didn't make that promise.
Exactly.
Or you've got a new government. And we know that the coalition are tearing themselves apart, especially federally, about whether or not they even will commit to a net zero target.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you could end up with a more a new government in New South Wales that's antagonistic to climate action, pro-coal, and just going, well, great, we've got a rubber stamp here for whatever it is, for major natural resources or renewable energy projects as well, which are so just disempowering the community.
Yeah, and there are so many problems with the bill. There's a lot of technical detail to it. EDO's got a great brief online that people can find if they Google it. Lots of problems. So our starting point is, look, if you're going to introduce something so radical with zero public consultation, it's really not okay to just ram it through the parliament without any debate, where there could be some really serious unintended consequences. And, in the coal space, we've seen what that looks like. There are literally people in jail right now because of corrupt conduct in the way the coal leases have been handled. Tony Kelly at the moment, there's more ICAC drama there as a former Labor minister. And we've also seen stuff happen like, there was an expansion you are familiar with as well, Jeremy, at Dendrobium in the Illawarra. The Independent Planning Commission did look at that project. They wanted to strip coal out from underneath the drinking water catchment. The landscape would collapse. The creek beds would crack.
This is the drinking water catchment for a couple million people in southern Sydney.
And Sydney. So drinking water catchment of 5.
It's not like a village down in the Southern Highlands.
5 million people rely on it.
Yeah, 5 million people rely on this for their water to survive.
Yeah, so at the time, the Planning Commission said, this is crazy. We cannot support this. And they said no. And what happened? The company came back with a fast track application. They convinced the minister of the day to give it a special declaration, critical state significant infrastructure, which meant that the decision would bypass the Independent Planning Commission. So that's already happened. The company withdrew that one, so it never went ahead. But that's the kind of thing that happens in New South Wales. So we've seen it happen before. We know there's a lot of political heat on these kinds of projects, and we know that we have this desperate need to do something about our emissions problem, and also to protect the communities that are getting smashed by gas and coal.
It may not just be a coal mine; it could be It could be a nuclear power station. It could be, like you have a Liberal government who've, taken we don't know what their position is on nuclear now, but it was pretty
Absolutely.
widely rejected by the electorate in the last federal election. But they keep rehashing that. It could be nuclear power station for Muswellbrook, for the Wakehurst Parkway, for Western Sydney. These types of things. Who knows? You could end up with something as contentious as that.
So you've been in the parliament a long time. So with a bill like that, like what would the argument be for not sending it off to a committee so the parliament could review it?
Well, not very well. It would be a very tenuous one because we have inquiries into all kinds of things like, thresholds on the payroll tax and its application of that is like a year-long inquiry we're looking into. We're talking about a multi-generational change to one of the most important pieces of legislation in the state, with implications for a whole range of for sort of what we do in industry and planning everywhere. It's certainly a thing, an act that a bill that it will become an act that needs scrutiny. I can't see how you can make an argument. So, but there's there's a lot of pressure around the housing issue, and so there's always this opportunism you see in politics. There's a crisis. Well, what can we do? There's a crisis, so we will rush through some changes in a crisis that have long-term implications that we all have to live with. So I do expect it to go to inquiry. I can't see that it won't be the subject of it, but really it's in the hands of the Liberal Party, who are getting a lot of pressure from the property industry and other vested interests. You see the Minerals Council, the rest of them, you see them marching up and down the corridors. A lot of them are former politicians.
Yeah.
And so you have that revolving door issue. And you've got community groups and the, environmental defenders offices and others. They're, hard pressed to have their voice heard. But you've been doing a great job, Nick. I hear you, and a lot of people are saying, hey, we should, hasten slowly into a massive reform like this. Now, before we go, I'd like to, to get your sense of how things are going. Are you positive that we can make the change? Do you are you a doomer? Do you think we're fucked, or do you think is there some gallows humor that you just go, look, I'll go out swinging? Do you think it's too late? Can we pull on the handbrake now and save our climate, or how do you feel about the future?
No, it's a good question. Look, I'm mostly kind of, a glass half full optimist kind of guy, sometimes with not very good reason to be so. But I reckon it's the only way you can kind of keep yourself going. Mostly, I think, look, it's such a great bunch of people in this state and around Australia who are trying to do the right thing, positive things. People out there in regional communities, people in the cities, people in the parliament. So, for one thing, it's just good to be part of a community of people who are trying to do something positive. And, I get a bit of strength from that. And also, sometimes in my job, we haven't even talked about the coal seam gas Narrabri issue, but I'm also working on that campaign. I'm a unionist, part of the ASU. I'm also on a Unions New South Wales Pilliga committee, backed by the union movement here in New South Wales. I get a lot of strength from that and encouragement. This is a union movement who's standing with the Gomeroi people who've said no to Santos's checks, who are trying to buy their support for this gas project on their land. The union movement's backed them in. My understanding is that it went to a full vote of the Unions New South Wales Council, and it was the first time in 90 years that the left of the New South Wales union movement had won a full vote of council on any issue. And the issue was support by the union movement for Gomeroi people who say no to Santos. So, they said no. They lost in the Native Title Tribunal. They said no. They appealed. They won this amazing appeal led by an Aboriginal First Nations lawyer, Tony McAvoy, incredible legal mind on a novel ground. It went back to the tribunal. They lost again. But Gomeroi mob aren't giving up. They're back. They've appealed for a second time. It's being heard on the 25th of November in Brisbane. I know a bunch of that community. They're some great people, community-minded, thinking about culture, thinking about their kids, thinking about this incredible country that they are connected to, that they feel a duty to protect. Trying to keep culture alive. And I think that's amazingly positive. There's so many great people out there. We've got a Gomeroi traditional custodian who works for Lock the Gate who lives in Narrabri. So that's one of the privileges of my job too, just learning more about culture and, First Nations communities and just to see that are people who've suffered so much in our community since colonisation, still fighting the good fight with good humour most of the time. And just, grit. It kind of inspires me to do what I can, with the Lock the Gate mob based here in Sydney. So on balance, I'd rather be doing this kind of work than anything else.
Well, Nick, more power to your arm, more power to Lock the Gate, more power to the Gomeroi. It's inspirational work, incredibly important work. We can have wins, like delay for a lot of these fossil fuel companies is a win. We've seen that with Santos. But yeah, more power to your arm. Thank you very much, mate, for coming into the weeds to talk to us about the important work you're doing in community and on behalf of the community. Thanks very much, mate.
Thanks for the invite, JB. It's been great to get the opportunity to come in and have a yarn. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks, Nick.
Cheers.
Fantastic.